Hello, everybody. My guest is Saffi Biasetti. We're going to be talking about somatic psychotherapy. I really want to learn more about what that is.
Yes.
Self-regulation, which can't hurt any of us to learn more about that. Self-worth and body image. So please say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Diane, for having me on. I'm excited to be here. Talk about all these fabulous things.
Yes. Okay. Somatic. I keep hearing the phrase somatic body work.
Yes.
What does this mean?
Oh, I'm glad you asked because I think the word has kind of run wild recently, which I'm glad about. Having done this work for so many years, I'm so glad it's on the map now. But basically, somatic, if we take the root word soma, S-O-M-A, right, means the body. So somatic therapy or somatic coaching or somatic work in any form basically means using the body to help with self-awareness and self-understanding. So another term of that is using a bottom-up approach. We're so cognitively based and trained and informed. So this is sort of dropping out of the mind, getting into the sensing, feeling body, and then creating understanding, linkages, associations that our mind may make after the felt experience. So it's really using the body to gain self-awareness, and it's pretty amazing what happens in a short time for people.
That's very interesting that that's broken out and become a new phrase people are using because I've studied hypnosis for
Yeah,
35 years and taught people about perception versus instinct and where the differences are. And I always say one of the first things you want to notice is, how your body feels. Did you, are your shoulders suddenly up near your neck? Is your
exactly.
chest happening? Are you like stepping back from the person? But I focus it more on, the language of the body and what the body is sensing and observing.
Perfect. Yeah, that's actually a huge piece of it. I actually tell people all the time that words are such an important component of somatic work. They need to be because words ground and land in our body on a metaphysical representative way, in a metaphysical representative way, meaning so often I tell my clients that I say to them from the start, I may interrupt you a lot as you go along, and that's very purposeful and intentional. I'm not being rude, but I'm going to have someone pause when they either say a word multiple times in the first 10 minutes of arriving, or when they say a word that then evokes I see their eyes starting to gather tears, or I see their shoulders go up, as you said, or they lean more into me or further away. So those are the moments I'll pause because they don't even recognize what just shifted within. So really the focus of somatic work is for me as their guide is to constantly take what they're telling me both in their body language, their words, their emotional expression, and to make sure that I pause so that they can reflect on how that's landing inside and what's changing inside. Otherwise, it just remains as a quote unquote, insight, cognitive insight, and when they leave from here, a lot of times that goes away, but when they can sense it and feel it and they notice that shift happening within, then I'll ask them to pay attention to that until we meet again. So I see when that happens again. When do you notice that tension that formed or those tears coming again or that word coming to your mind again? So we start to put those associations together and it becomes a powerful shift for them.
That's an interesting point. I blog every day, and one of the blogs that always gets an interesting discussion going is when I remind people if you're talking with someone, if you're having a conversation, if they mention something 3 times within a short period of time, you're getting a lot of information. Now, what you're going to do with that is going to be up to you. Are you going to ask them about it? Are you going to redirect the conversation around that? Are you going to ask them why it's on their mind? I mean, it may be on their mind because they have indigestion. It may be on their mind because they really want to talk about it.
Exactly, exactly.
It's
And
what consciously comes up in what we're saying
that's right,
that
exactly.
has meaning on a conscious level worth exploring.
That's right, exactly. And a lot of times, people really, until they pause and slow down, and that's a big piece of somatic work as well, is the slowing down process. I do a lot of consultation for therapists, and I often say to them, your sessions have to go a lot slower and smaller, actually, because people come in with big stories. And in that whole story is often just a few repetitive body patterns that they are not aware of. And really, if we slow it down and pause more often and just spend our time letting people sense in and be quiet, even sometimes my sessions have a lot of silent moments so that they can reflect. And there's less talking, more sensing, feeling.
Hmm. It's very interesting. When did you start? Where did your focus come on somatic therapy?
I started off as a clinical social worker in the field 36 years ago, actually, and then went from my back for my PhD in psychology with a transpersonal psychology focus. It was about 16 years ago now, but I started the somatic focus about 25 years ago after I trained in yoga and as a certified yoga therapist. And it was really after my own embodied experience and really understanding, after all those years of being a clinician and then going for my yoga therapy training, I sort of said, what happened here? How come they never taught us any of this? Because it was such an enormous learning that I was really blown away at the time, saying, like, wow, my goodness, I learned half of what I really needed to learn. So going through that personal experience and really feeling so much more alive. So I do want to say that in the world of somatic work, there is a difference between somatic understanding and embodiment. So embodiment is developing a relationship with our body through that feeling, sensing, experiencing door, that everything we just talked about. So in other words, over time, somatic work leads to that embodied relationship. So for myself, I had been doing my own yoga work, practice for a long time. It wasn't until I trained in it and really immersed in it that I realized, well, wait a second, not only am I more aware of what I'm sensing and feeling and felt like I was more present and connected in my life, but I was actually developing like a stronger relationship with my body and starting to care for it differently and protect it differently. So that's the embodiment end. So that's the cool part about somatic work, is that over time you hear people come in and just start speaking about that more connected relationship with their body. Like, I'll hear them come in and say, well, I kind of want to know what that pain is and see if there's anything else I can do about it. So you hear them developing this lovely, compassionate relationship with their body that they never had.
That's fascinating. And you're making me think. I hear people talk about the mind body connection, and I always say, well, wait a second, you're missing the third component, which to me is the heart.
Yes.
Because your heart, one way or another, gives you so many messages, and connected with words. My heart's breaking, that was, so words tie into it, but at the same time, feeling that heartbeat go up, elevate, feeling your pulse go up, feeling that sensory, actual biological thing that's happening in your body with your mind, your body, the heartbeat, and all of it interplaying in a single moment.
Absolutely. It really is like every organ. I like to make a joke in my office that, I like to bring the organs alive, like the talking organs, like what's happening in that stomach? What's happening? Can we really get a sense and feel there? And you're right. And, whenever I teach yoga, it's so typical in a yoga practice, right? To be saying, oh yes, mind, body, and heart, and like the yogis know all about that. We never question it. We don't say that it's some woo-woo thing, because it really is a deeply felt sense that something happens, and this isn't just like I said, it's not just a woo-woo experience. It's actually in our brain too, because when you talk about connecting with the heartbeat, well, that's what we call an interoceptive moment. So interoceptive awareness, which is lighting up the region in our brain and deep in the limbic system, has everything to do with forming a sense of who we are, like really forming, like, who am I, on a deeper level of consciousness and understanding. So it's a really amazing piece that I always say, our ancient spiritual practices and indigenous folks, knew long before we ever did in our modern day psychology, because they knew that, maybe they didn't know what was happening in the brain, but they certainly knew that if we connected to our body, that we reach different states of consciousness, and that there was a wholeness or a more heartfelt experience between, not just toward ourselves, but with others. So the interesting thing is, the more we develop that internal awareness and that interoception comes alive over time, the more compassion opens. And that compassion is not just self-compassion, but it's compassion toward others as well. So we develop, there's the spiritual end of, somatic embodiment work, is that we develop a connection deeper to others, and more interconnectedness all around us. So it really has a ripple effect.
Now that kind of ties into one of the headline topics we started with, which is your self-regulation and the connection with your self-worth.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'll say the word regulation too is a big one out there. Everyone, I say, is a nervous system regulator now and all that. And again, I'm glad that it's out there and on the books, and we're bringing, a lot of conversation around it. It's super important. I like people to understand that our body's natural state is, when we hear the word regulation, I know that before I understood it much, many years ago, I thought that meant I had to be, like the monk, super calm and like Shavasana in a yoga class. But really, our body's natural state, what is regulation on the internal state of our bodies, is really homeostasis. But if we take a look at what homeostasis is, it's constant change and flux. So when things are working properly inside, and this goes even for our mind, here's the mind-body connection, it means that we can have lots of ongoing flux and change, both in mind states and in internal sensory experience, without getting caught up. So maybe without ruminating in the mind or constant worry, that attachment starts to fade away when there's better regulation in mind and body. Our autonomic nervous system creates an ability for us to bounce back. So I often tell my clients, it's okay if there's a popular word, triggered. It's okay if you're off your center. I call that off your center. It's okay if you're off your center. That's going to happen. That's a natural experience. How do you come back? How do you come back? What's your elasticity inside, both in your mind and your body, to come back to focus on what feels good, to come back to focus on what's okay in the moment? And how about even the neutral? Because we're so programmed to focus on what's not okay, and our negativity bias is real programmed in our brain. But how do we bounce back? That's really what regulation is, and how much that affects the way we see ourselves on all levels, both on image and our worth, our sense of worth.
It's a really great point about elasticity and flexibility, because it's such a visual to me when I see huge trees 100, 200-year-old trees that have been ripped out of the ground and are on the ground. And then I think of bamboo that you can't pull out of the ground no matter what you do. It stays standing. You can't cut it. You can't knock it down. But boy, does it sway in the breeze. And I have limited hearing. So when I hear bamboo. And I get so excited when I hear it because it's a sense that I never wanted to lose. I always loved that sound because it always reminded me of the power of flexibility.
Yes, it's amazing. I'm trying to remember the great yogi who said the words. I'm not sure which one it was, but I believe it may be Iyengar, which is my lineage in the yoga therapy world. But he would say, strength without flexibility is no strength at all. And he meant that both in the body, but really meant it in the mind, because even in a practice like that, or anything that we do, if we don't have the ability, and my husband, we were at the gym the last week, and yeah, he was riding the bike at the gym, and he had this horrible grimace on his face. I said to him, what's happening there? You look miserable. You look miserable. He's like, oh, well, it's really tough. And I said, well, what about if you just rode the bike to where it felt energizing, but not torture? And he said, oh, but my mind is so programmed as an athlete, years ago, was so programmed that it doesn't, I have to go harder and more. And so I said, well, can you have the flexibility in your mind to let go of that? And now let's see what this is like in your older body, to be able to come into this in a new way. And he came home proudly the other day from the gym and said, I actually slowed it down and I went longer. And I didn't have the grimace. And so I said, oh, look at that. You had the malleability and the elasticity in your mind. So it's an important point because, especially when it comes to our bodies, we are so hung up on the ideas that we have about our body on every level. That's one example of exercise, and the way we look and the way our bodies are supposed to stay the same all the time. These are such rigid, inflexible thoughts that don't match the nature of our body.
Another thing you mentioned earlier was, the idea of people. It's so funny. I always say to people, you never just get there. And don't assume I'm there. I don't know anyone who's there. There will always, because life just keeps coming at you. Yeah. And when people say, oh, well, you never seem to get triggered or you never seem to get angry, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You just haven't seen it. I don't post it on social media too often. Right. But it's that people not understanding that full range of emotions is all just part of the human process. And it's always, I think it was Sherry Huber who wrote about depression as not like a noun as far as something that encompasses people, but as a verb. It's the activity of pushing something down and saying, well, I only want to feel love, I only want to feel happy, I only want to feel joy. And if I have these negative emotions, well, I got to push those down, push them down, which creates that internal pressure, which I imagine you've observed in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, that idea of depression as pushing down, because that is exactly the embodied experience of it, isn't it? And the same thing when we're in overdrive, the opposing experience, which is, oh my gosh, I'm out of control, and this whole idea of control even is really what we're saying. And I think the easiest way that I can educate people who have felt disconnected in their bodies for so long is to bring them back to, everyone has observed a baby, whether they have had their own or they have just observed someone else's. Watch how we come into the world. We come into the world in this absolutely wide open range of emotion, and free flowing and changeable and adaptable, and able to be soothed and then can change again. And so we do want to start to understand and question, Is it more regulation that comes in? Well, yes, of course, when we gain more internal agency and our cognitive functioning comes on board and everything else. But we also have to question, how much of that is socially constructed for us too, that says dampen that down, take it down, don't be too much, don't feel too much, don't express too much, is a big one, especially for women in my office. How often I'm working with the voice and the throat in doing exactly what we're doing here, freely expressing and sharing our opinions and our ideas. So it's a big piece when it comes to, when did that idea begin that emotions, only certain emotions are allowed and
Well,
others aren't.
socialization is an endlessly fascinating topic to me because obviously we need socialization as a society. It's
Absolutely.
extremely important. And it's also extremely important to look at those socialization processes, whether it was with, you could say parents, school, clubs you were a member of, sports teams you played on, friends you hung out with. Each creates their own social language, their own social hierarchy, their own development of what's okay in the group and what's not okay in the group. And then doing that editing as you grow and come into yourself as an adult and saying, okay, let's look at that script. Let's look at what might need to be edited. Let's look at what's working in that, because there are all good things of all of those things. Even your worst experience, you can find good things from it, which is hard to believe, but I truly believe that. You can find something good in that moment. People do.
Yes, yes.
You know,
And,
of
and
course, I don't like to skip them, but.
yes, exactly. And I also like to make space for, the real, obviously, this is what I do day in and day out, is make space for the real suffering too. So sometimes I like to say, and it's okay if it just sucked too. Like we have to make space for that too, that some things don't have to turn into or can't turn into, necessarily a growth experience. And that's okay. Can we make space for that suffering and that grief too? Because we do live in a toxic positivity, culture as well. So let's make space for what,
Let's
you
talk
know,
about that because I think that is so important.
yeah.
Um, Toxic positivity. It's one of my concerns when I see people, they'll say, chat's my new best friend. I'm like, oh, really? Why? I go on there, tells me how fabulous I am, tells me I'm wonderful, tells me I'm doing everything right. I'm like, okay. Let's I'd wonder about a friend like that. Personally, I'd definitely fire a therapist like that.
Right, exactly, exactly. And to me, that's so concerning too, that this is where it's at right now. And we do have to be so careful of that because I think it speaks to such a deeper longing, this toxic positivity, and to have to go to something like that can only tell us nice things, is that it's a deep longing to belong. That as you just mentioned before, think way back to how we become socialized and all those areas we become socialized in. Every single child, as a matter of fact, adolescent brains, like their brain development is completely focused on belonging, completely. And that's why tell parents, the social media has a greater influence on them than you, because that's their social group and that's where they're looking to belong. So, really, when we're longing for that positivity, that's the self-compassion. And I really say, what's happening inside, are we able to give that to ourselves? Or usually the case is that we've been so harsh and judgmental and self-critical of ourselves and are keeping that old lack of self-worth alive, that we would have to reach out so much to find whatever is going to help us fit in. So it's a tough one.
It's a sad one, and I and
Yeah.
I think it's also at the root of a lot of divisiveness.
Yes.
Because if you know, I don't know if this is a great example, but it kind of takes me back to the playground in elementary school, which was not always a pleasant experience, but you learned a lot about yourself. You learned when to open your mouth and when to be quiet, when to watch and when to, defend or chime in,
Yeah.
when to butt in and when to not. Those are incredible socialization skills that many of us would have liked to have skipped. I mean, I did get myself beat up one day, defending a girl who was lying, and I found out the next day if she really was lying, but you learn.
Yeah.
And when you're on a social media world where it's you're great girl, all the great, it starts to not just slow down your self-reflection mode, which I think is, nobody wants, I always joke, I look in the mirror for self-reflection to check my lipstick. I do it a little more than that. But not much, you want to reflect a bit, but not, as you said, ruminate, stay there, get stuck. And at the same time, we need to interact as people and know that you're not living in your own private Idaho. You must learn to have those social systems where you can be all that, but all that ends when you want everyone to tell you that's all great all the time or something. There have to be compromises in those areas.
That's right. And I think it actually goes back to what we said earlier, which is that flexibility, because, what you're mentioning is the co-regulation. We need others. As a matter of fact, COVID was such why did we all feel so horrific and depleted? Because we didn't have co-regulation enough. We weren't seeing each other. We weren't being with each other, especially people who lived alone. So, to create that flexibility, we need to have that up and down. So it wouldn't be natural or normal in our own schema, in our own body, actually, to have just positivity, because that's, again, we're in flux and we're in change, and things don't feel that way all the time. I make a joke sometimes when clients come into my office, if they are super happy, I'm like, okay, now I know where I have to go. I have to help them sort of, co-regulate around what doesn't feel okay. Because that's the whole piece. If we're told greatness all the time, then we have no ability to be with what doesn't feel okay. And that is both internally in our body, what we think about, what we see, even. So adapting to our bodies changes everything else. So it really does come back to that co-regulation as well, as far as how do we begin to balance this.
For those who don't know what co-regulation means,
Yeah.
can you give a definition of that?
Sure. So internally in our autonomic nervous system, when we talk about that regulation and that bouncing back, we have an area within our autonomic functioning called the ventral vagal complex. And we like to call that, on a embodied level, on the somatic level, it's our eyes, our mouth, our voice, and our heart. So that's actually where the vagus nerve travels, but that part of our body is really representative of when our social engagement system is either online or offline. So you and I talking, chatting back and forth, our eye gaze, able to make eye contact. That is what we do for one another. So there's times, though, that there's been plenty of social experiments where people are talking, and then one person purposely gazes away while the other person is talking. And there was, an actual research study done with infants years ago. We would never do that now with infants, but that was in the days where they allowed that to be. And it's actually a heartbreaking research study. Trying to remember the name of it. It may come to me.
Where they look at the babies.
Yes,
Terrible.
the mother purposely turns away, and you watch the baby really start to go from laughing. She was playing peekaboo, and go from laughing to all of a sudden, like desperately trying to get her back and then giving up. And that collapse is the saddest thing actually to watch, so that because the baby gives up and just actually goes quiet, which is they go down regulated and quiet. So our social engagement and that co-regulation is about staying attuned with one another. And when we're with another person, really recognizing, like, hey, are you okay today? Or exactly like I was saying, I do with my clients, like something just changed. You're not the same today. Or, oh, you're very, up and upbeat today, or you're not the same as what I saw you the other day. That sort of little shift and recognition is really what helps us to actually have that flexibility so much more. So when children have that attunement at a young age and that co-regulation at a young age, it really is healthy attachment, and it helps us to actually grow up with more flexibility.
Mm-hmm. You know, for a while, um, speaking the baby study, which I always found one of the most disturbing things, being the mother of two children, and just
Yeah,
how to do that to babies, even for an experiment. And I've
yeah,
spent 30 years with clinical trials, so it was like I just found that structure incredibly disturbing.
yes.
Um, but one of the phrases that went around the internet for a while, and I remember a group of kids sitting in our house, and I used to, be the fly on the wall, when they were around, never interrupt when they were having their friend conversations, but it like sent me from 0 to 60. They were talking about how irrelevant one of the people at the school was. It's like, okay, that conversation's never going to happen in my house again. Mom came into that conversation, and it's the same thing I think when I see it, when I've seen it online over the years, when someone will say, oh, well, they were irrelevant, they mean nothing. It's like the worst comment someone could make to another person. It's like, shame on you.
Yes, yeah. It really is speaking to the depth of non-belonging, isn't it? Like really just letting someone know they don't matter. And this is this is humanity, isn't it? It's common humanity. It's we desperately need to know we matter to at least
Mhm.
someone.
Yeah.
That there's something that we can connect with. I hear that constantly from my clients, is about finding at least some community or some group that they feel they can fit in and belong in. Because as we know, there's such marginalization for so many different reasons, out in the world, that and bodies are a big one. If we think back to those social groups, bodies stand out in all different ways with
Mhm.
children, and we think it's just body image as far as size, but I like to expand that. I'm like, no, it's body image as far as anything that appears to be slightly different than the collective. And that is, I've heard it from people's hair. My hair was too curly. My hair was too straight. My body was too large. My body was too small. I was too tall. I was too short. I wore glasses. I didn't wear glasses. My skin color was this. Oh, I was not as light as this. I wasn't as dark as this. We can go on forever about the differences. So, a lot of this self worth and non belonging starts with I often ask the question, when do you believe your body first became a problem out in the
Mm.
world on any level? On any
Great.
level. Yeah. And it really like speaks to the heart. Like we're saying, it goes right to the heart because it takes us out of here and says, oh, it was that first time that, Joe told me or Jenny told me, it was, so it really, or the first time I walked into a room and as a kid and I looked around and I saw no one else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I could keep talking to you for hours. Your wealth of knowledge.
Thank
You
you,
truly
Tanya.
are. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Do
Thank
you have any parting thoughts of something that I have really missed asking you that you would love to share with this audience?
Let's see. I think we covered a lot, but I think the one thing I will say is to pay really careful attention to what we have held on to, because it's like I said, the common humanity, it's a human experience to hold on to that this is my fault or I don't belong or I'm not good enough. And to understand that, so much of that is really the external impacting the internal. And what I say to folks is, if you feel that a lot, please pay attention to the people, the places, the spaces, animals, anything that you're around when you don't have that feeling. And to pay attention to that, because that means that you are co-regulated. That means that you have come into a place where you do feel like you could be fully yourself. So let's pay attention to that, and we see how everything starts to change in our body, in our brain, in our mind state, and in our heart. And let's see if we can bring more of that, of whatever that tiny little piece was. Let's see if we can bring more of that into our lives.
That is excellent advice and gets back to that co-regulation, flexibility, and seeing how you can be a bit of everything in that day.
Exactly, exactly. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness, everybody, this has been an absolutely great episode. I've been speaking with Dr. Saffi Biasetti, and she's a wealth of knowledge, and there are going to be all kinds of links to follow her. She's wise. She's not just smart, she's wise, and that is a characteristic I personally happen to really admire in people when it comes out in a conversation, because that wisdom comes from a lot of experience and rethinking and reanalyzing and looking at things and meeting with other people and connecting and hearing them as well. So I really thank you for your time very much.
Thank you, Diane. It's been a pleasure.
We are going to be moving over to the green room. Again, there'll be all kinds of links to click below to follow. And I highly recommend you do. Share this episode with your friends, because guys or girls, everyone could benefit from this, and I think at every age. So please do share it. There's a lot of good general info. Hit subscribe. I'm Dian Griesel. I'm also known as Silver Disobedience. This is the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. Hit subscribe and follow all the links, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.